Hi everyone, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining in. I think all of our panelists are here, so we can start the session. I would like to invite Ms. Vidya Soundarajan, the Director of Footprints at WWF India, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Thank you, Karishma. Um, so, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all. This panel in supply chains forms the core of WWF's ethos, mandate, and purpose. And I'm actually really enthralled to see so many engaging partners and forest stewards, as I would like to call you, with us today and beyond and always. As you all know, forests help sustain all the life on Earth by providing critical ecosystem services. One can go into millions of numbers to say 13 million people's jobs are directly related to forests and ancillary producers from forest. And in spite of the fact that we've had such dependence, every year 13 million hectares of forest disappears. And you know, all of you have read the Living Planet report of WWF, and we are already using 1.5 times the earth that you have. Given given the latest IPCC report, which spoke about state of climate emergency, and people like me and several of you working in the sustainability sector, all of us have known this for a long time now, that the climate, this has become an existential crisis. It's going to affect our GDPs, global GDP, and so much of estimated at some 43 million hectares of natural land um, could be destroyed, and we are at the verge of ecosystem collapse. Um, going we have put a price on everything. We've put a price on pollination, we've put a price on water, we've put a price on every natural resource that's there, which is to nurture and protect us as human beings. But inherently, with the given the exploitative nature that we have obviously you know not used potentially sustainable methods, and obviously caused a lot of damage. The very reason why we are now having to engage in the conversation such as what we are going to do today is primarily because of unattended, unstopped, unsustainable consumption that all of us have been engaging in, for industrial development, for economy, finance being the core currency. Recently, with the COVID-19, suddenly it has become the topic of conversation for everybody to say, zoonotic diseases. Again, as sort of people involved in conservation and wildlife and forests, and I now include all the naturalists and environmentalists and conservationists. We've been saying this, and scientists, for so many years, that it's the it's clearing of forests which opens us up to millions of these zoonotic diseases that we know nothing about, and we don't know how to deal with it. And over and above all of this, the core of the issue now, that the carbon sequestration benefit that it offers, which is like the mother of all problems that we have today. In spite of knowing all of that, there is obviously some gap somewhere, and we are having to work around making supply chains sustainable, bringing in sort of safety, environmental safeguards and regulations in the process, developing frameworks and indices which can actually help measure and promote sustainable forestry. And many of us, many of the leading companies, I mean, three of the panelists from P&G, ITC, and Godrej, as well as, from the investment community, you've been sort of the thought leaders and early movers in this process. But I think what's crucial and this is a very personal point of view and potentially is very close to all of your hearts as well, is that this needs to pick up a huge momentum, and especially looking at India, which is a large importer of a number of these products, like palm oil or soya bean or rubber, which form the core of several ecosystems and basically which are now planted in large plantations by clearing out forests. And so how do we contain that, and how do we minimize that? I mean, I won't go into numbers. I think you all know the numbers much better than I do, and I'm sure Karishma will allude to them. uh, but it's in double digit percentages of the total land available that's being cleared out to basically ensure that we feed the greed of multiple products, of which there is a huge demand. So in that context, I think this session is very, very important in sort of bringing in the wider view, bringing in the sort of first hand experience from all four of you panelists, who I'm very grateful to that you agreed to be part of this conversation. And CII, as the sort of industry focused champion organization, we are really hoping that these practices, these indices are more widely used, and people understand, and businesses take this up, internalize this, make it a core of their essence, so that we are able to somehow or the other protect our natural resources and safeguard ourselves against climate change, against all of these basic requirements that we have in life, and help us towards that. So from that perspective, I think I'm very excited about this session. I look forward to uh, an enticing and a very interesting conversation, and potentially something that can actually guide us all collectively together to make that difference. So I welcome you all the participants, as well specifically, our sort of esteemed panelists, Mr. Ramnath Vaidyanathan, Ms. Lilian Wang, Mr. S.N. Venkatraman, as well as Mr. Girish Deshpande. I'm really keen, and I'm looking forward to getting your interesting views and perspectives, and also a sprinkle of challenges and opportunities. So welcome you all. For the next 1 hour, hopefully we'll hear something very, very interesting and something that can guide us to the future. With that, I hand over to Karishma to lead you into the, what we are waiting for, the actual conversation, panel discussion. Thank you.
I can just start with giving a brief about the session structure and how the discussion will be progressing. So the panel discussion is for 50 minutes, and we would start with a brief context of what the session will be about. And we'll just move forward to each of the panelists. Then we'll spend 4 to 5 minutes on hearing inputs from each of the panelists, post which we'll be taking questions, 1 or 2 questions to each panelist, depending on the availability of time. So with that background, I can just start with just a context setting. Aspit, could you please share the slides? Please move to the second slide. Yeah, so as Vidya has given a very insightful background on why forests are important for us, and she's also mentioned that we're rapidly losing forests due to various reasons. With just over half of world's forests remaining intact, most of them which have been heavily altered already by people. And according to WRI's estimate, it's only 22% of the Earth's original forests that remain in large, relatively natural ecosystems currently. Around 13 million hectares of forest that were converted to other uses or lost through natural causes each year in the last decade. We have been losing nature rapidly into overexploitation of natural resources due to various reasons, including unsustainable agriculture, consumption habits, infrastructure, logging, mining. These have been leading to habitat degradation and loss, which is resulting in epidemics, pollution, as well as climate change. Next slide, please. So So here we present that India is one of the fastest growing consumer markets in the world. We can see with the very fast growing economy, rising middle class population, which is leading to changing consumption patterns as well as greater urbanization. With these growing consumption patterns and the consumption outstripping domestic production, it is leading to significant reliance on imports. And India holds a pivotal position in the global forest products trade with a growing potential to influence forest management in a wide range of countries. The growing demand is responsible for speeding up the rate of deforestation and degradation across commodities such as soybean oil, palm oil, timber, pulp and paper, as well as natural rubbers through unsustainable logging and expanding agricultural practices in the world's key forest fronts. Deforestation and conversion is uneven across geographies, and based on our analysis, more than half of the total deforestation front currently, as you can see, lies in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Oceania, which concentrates about 24 deforestation fronts. So looking at that, India is a major commodities from these deforestation fronts. So if we come to the first commodity, which is timber, India accounts for about 30% of all tropical timber trade, which makes it the world's second largest importer of industrial groundwood. As we can see, the key partner countries are Myanmar as well as Malaysia for India. Moving forward to, can we move to the next animation? Yeah, so moving forward to edible oils, in terms of palm oil as well as soybean oil, India is amongst the largest importer as well as the largest consumer. Most of the palm oil is coming from Malaysia and Indonesia, where majority of the biodiversity hotspots are there. And as well as for soybean oil, I think the most of the biodiversity hotspots that are, can you move to the next slide? Next, please. Yeah, so for soybean oil, most of the biodiversity hotspots are situated in Cerrado and Amazon rainforest area, which is leading to the imports of soybean oil from Argentina as well as Brazil. Similarly, for natural rubber, India is the second largest consumer of natural rubber. Most of the demand is going to the Indian tire industry, which contributes to about 40% of the demand. And for that as well, the major deforestation fronts lie in Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, which are key trade partners for India. So this demand is only expected to rise in future, and India has an important role to play by influencing environmentally and socially sustainable production practices. Reversing deforestation requires a concerted effort from stakeholders across the value chain, which includes policymakers in forest countries to remedy governance failures, policymakers in consumer countries as well to take action through regulatory measures to ensure better production and consumption practices, for companies to live up to the deforestation-free commitments and implementing sustainability in supply chains, financial industry to invest in sustainable companies, as well as consumers to move towards environmentally friendly choices. With this context, the session would discuss the need for building deforestation-free supply chains across forest-linked commodities, the business case for the same, as well as the roadmap for companies to build to responsible procurement practices for ending tropical deforestation. This is key to achieving the objective of both the Paris Climate Agreement as well as the UN SDGs. With this, I would like to invite our first speaker for the session, Mr. Girish Deshpande, Sustainability Director at Procter & Gamble, to highlight the importance of corporate commitments in achieving net zero deforestation and share some perspectives from international FMCGs in influencing these efforts in India. Over to you, Mr. Deshpande. You're on mute, Mr. Deshpande, you're on mute.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Now you can hear me, hopefully. Yeah, thank you, Karishma, for the kind words and introduction. And I look forward to saying a few words that will help on the journey of deforestation-free supply chains. So I work for P&G. We're a big consumer goods company, global consumer goods company, and we are probably the second biggest consumer goods company user of palm and palm oil products. And most of our sourcing comes from the Malaysia, Indonesia supply chains. And P&G is committed to the responsible sourcing of palm such that it doesn't impact the ecosystems from a deforestation conversion, and also it protects the people whose livelihood it is in those forests and those people who live off that land. So we are members of the RSPO, and our commitment is to be RSPO certified, and our compliance process is to be RSPO certified for all the palm that we use in our brands. Can we go on to the slide? Is it possible to share the slides that I sent?
Yes, I'll just share it.
Thank you, Asprit. So what we do have, and I want to share with you our Forest Positive program, and it basically boils into 3 strategy planks. The first 2 are primarily involved in our supply chains, and the third goes beyond our supply chains and looks at, I would say, to improve the and provide positive solutions for the industry. For the first 2 aspects of our Forest Positive programs about responsible sourcing, it clearly is linked to RSPO Principles and Criteria 2018, and also clearly regarding having specific targets to achieve 100% RSPO certification for all palm that's used in P&G brands. And the second element, of course, is in compliance monitoring. It's ensure once you've got there, how do you ensure on a day-to-day basis that you'll continue to meet all your policy requirements that you've laid out for your suppliers. And the third element really is about partnership and a force for good. So partnership, I'm here talking about other industry partners, such as the RSPO, the Consumer Goods Forum, and you're talking about other industry groups that we're members of, but also with, I would say, our other peer group of, our peer groups, so the likes of Unilever, Nestle, Colgate, and so on. So, our intention here is to join forces with other industry partners to drive positive impact, in the world. So I would say that's one element. The other one element within our third strategy plank is about being a force for good. So how do you create positive impact, for communities? You create positive impact for climate and protection. And the third area is for biodiversities and species. So we have a pretty comprehensive program, which not only encompasses what we do in our supply chain, but also goes beyond that supply chain. Can I just go to the next slide? Thank you. So this gives you a flavor of, what our program is in that 3 strategy plank approach. The first, I just want to take a couple of minutes just to walk you through it. So the first element is about responsible sourcing. So it's clearly, we have laid out an expectation with all of our suppliers, how they will meet RSPO principles and criteria, and also, meet our policy expectations in terms of no deforestation, no peat, and no exploitation. Clearly, we've laid out some goals, which is that we'll be 100% RSPO certified for all P&G brands that use palm and palm derivatives, and we've delivered that. And we did that, in starting in 2021, and for the calendar year 2021, we're 100% RSPO certified. And then we clearly want to be transparent in our supply chain. So we've published all of our palm oil mill list, our supply list, and we do that, as per the RSPO requirements every 6 months. In the second element, compliance monitoring, we have, clearly we want to be accountable. So we publish all of our results. And secondly, we have a monitoring program, not only for environment, but also for social. So we have a collaboration with Earth Equalizer, and they give us all of the satellite imaging data that has potential not grievance, which is non-compliance to our policy. And also we have a program with FLA, the Fair Labor Association, with one of our biggest suppliers, which is FGV. And then in the third element, which is a force for good, I've talked about having outcomes in people and communities, biodiversity and species and landscape. In each one of these, we have programs which helps delivers that element of a strategy. So the first one is, in terms of people and community, we have a big smallholder program in Malaysia, specifically focused on Johor, and where we're trying to drive livelihood improvement through improvement in yield. And we have, as one element to that, is that we've just certified a first batch of independent smallholders who are RSPO certified all the way through to milestone B. So for us, that's a big transformational change. The second element really is around protecting species. So we have created a a program with WWF in Malaysia, protecting tigers in the landscape. And the third area, which is protecting landscape and climate, really, we're working with a consortia, which is a program called Rimba Collective, which is I would say an industry-wide program that's creating a 500,000 hectare of conservation protection over a 25-year period, trying to raise $1 billion in funds. So that really, for me, is, goes to show all of the three elements of our supply strategy program, which is, responsible sourcing, compliance monitoring, and a force for good. If you've got any questions, please, I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deshpande, for sharing what P&G has been doing in terms of commitments to responsible sourcing. It's very interesting to see. And we can definitely take some questions towards the end. But for now, just taking this session structure, I would request to move to the next panelist. So we'll move forward. We can now talk about the financial institutions and the influence they have over the global supply chains in driving deforestation, and the opportunity that they have for scaling up emerging models of deforestation-free finance. So with this, we invite our next speaker for the session, Ms. Lillian Wang, who is the Impact and Engagement Director at Arisec Partners, an investment management firm, to throw some light on the role of financial institutions in facilitating the integration of sustainability considerations in forest-linked commodities. Over to you, Ms. Wang.
Thank you, Karishma. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Yeah, thank you for having me on this panel with the other esteemed panelists. Just for background, Arisec Partners, as you mentioned, is an investment management firm. We started about 25 years ago out of Singapore. We invest only in emerging market listed equities, and we currently have about $5 billion in assets under management. And India is one of our largest geographies. In terms of our investment philosophy, we take a very long-term view to our investments. So we typically model our companies on a 25-year horizon. And with this outlook in mind, issues of sustainability, which in the shorter-term horizon may not seem material for us, can become very important to the investment case for a company. So taking deforestation specifically, as Vijay articulated very clearly in her opening, this can become an existential issue for businesses if you think about it from a long-term perspective. For those businesses that rely on forest commodities and ecosystem services in their supply chains. And with increasing pressure on governments from a climate change perspective, as well as a biodiversity perspective, to halt deforestation, we think there will be increasing regulation in this space. And as a result, companies that manage this risk appropriately and act early, we believe will have a competitive advantage in future, whether that is through avoiding risks of disruptions to their supply chain, potentially mitigating costs in terms of price increases or the cost of compliance, or in fact, looking at from the flip side, the opportunity side, from securing a long-term customer loyalty by demonstrating authentic sustainability credentials. I think I caught the end of the previous session, and I think it was mentioned there that studies have shown for a number of years now that consumers in emerging markets are willing to pay a premium for products and brands with environmental and sustainability credentials. I think I saw a Credit Suisse published a survey earlier in the year, their emerging markets consumer survey, which showed that in India, over 50% of those surveyed say that environmental considerations significantly influence their spending decisions. And this was true across different age brackets, as well as different income brackets. So I think there is a real opportunity there as well. In terms of how we integrate these considerations into our investment processes. We are, of course, one step removed, and as minority shareholders, we can't force our holdings to act in any specific way. But as part of our due diligence before we invest in a company, and then part of annual monitoring of that company, if we choose to invest, we consider the company's strategy, policies, disclosure, and performance with what we consider to be material environmental, social, or governance issues. We did a study that showed that our greatest exposure to deforestation is through our holdings in food and beverage companies, including some in India, who use soy and palm oil. So that's where we focus our engagement efforts in terms of speaking to management and trying to understand and encourage best practices when it comes to deforestation-free and responsible, sustainable supply chains. So yes, I mean that's probably sets out some background, and I'm very much looking forward to the questions and discussion later on.
So much, Ms. Wang, for elucidating on these points on how financial institutions are integrating these commitments for deforestation and conversion free, and how they're being proactive in commodity supply chains. With this, I would like to invite our next speaker for the session, Mr. S.N. Venkataraman, who is the Vice President of Marketing at ITC Limited. I invite him to share his views on the role of certifications and disclosures in mainstreaming sustainable supply chain commitments in Indian businesses and share perspectives from ITC's journey. Over to you, Mr. Venkataraman.
Thank you, Karishma, and good afternoon to all the panelists and whoever is listening in to this session. So let me begin by sharing a small presentation. Is this visible now? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so this session is about mainstreaming sustainable supply chain commitments and the role of certifications and disclosures. So let me begin with the disclosure. So I represent ITC's paper and paperboard business and not the whole of ITC. So I won't be talking about palm oil and our other practices in procuring other commodities which are there. But I think we have a long story with WWF and also with CII in the way that we have built up our business. So we are essentially a business, a pulp and paper business, which is built on wood. And the first fact which comes to mind that we make paper from wood. And when we were set up in 79-80, the government of India promised certain supplies from forests which were there. And that's why our main unit was located at Bhadrachalam. Now, in 1989, almost 10 years after we came into existence, forest policy was declared in India. And actually, forest produce was available less and less for the pulp and paper industry. So that got us thinking. So, we had to grow, we had to survive. And that is when we started a plantations program or an agroforestry program, which has now grown to be one of the most successful models of supplying, grouping small farmers together and supplying wood and into plantations. So you can see this particular slide. Let me make it full slide for you here. So you can see what we were in 1990. The Indian pulp and paper industry, 90% depended on government forests and hardly 10% on, the other sources of wood, including imported pulp. And by 2020, this had changed, 180 degrees. So 90% is from farm and agroforestry and only 10%, if at all, from government forests. And we in ITC, we today procure 1.6 million tons of wood annually for making our pulp and paper. So we have a chemical pulp mill, we have a PCTMP pulp mill, and the wood is locally procured. Now we start with the disadvantage, but the disadvantage actually become our advantage. So, this team is about deforestation. So I'm very happy to share with all the panelists and the participants here that actually we get all our wood from agri plantations, which are grown by farmers, small, medium farmers, and not from any forest. And it has been that way now for the last 10, 12 years. So how did we manage to do that? So we invested in a tree improvement program and went into clonal multiplication and R&D. So we today grow short cycle, species of wood, which are farmed actually on the marginal lands of farmers or where they don't grow cash crops or cereal crops, and within a 4-year rotation period. So we kept raising these plantations and we had to make it very competitive in order for the farmers to grow them. And we had to grow them within some core area of 300 kilometers. And along the way, our story included certifications. If you look at the story, it began in '89 with the inception of plantation program. We began with a very modest 17 hectares. Big leap came 10 years later when India liberalized, and we had a spurt of growth between 2000 to 2007-8, and that's when we also grew in terms of capacity. And once we got the pulp mill, the plantations had to really expand. 2004, ITC as a company started reporting on the triple bottom line: economic, social, and environmental. As part of the disclosure that we started doing annually. 2008-9, we became members of WWF GFTN. And we are proud to say that this association has stuck all 21 years. We are an invited member of WWF GFTN in India. And that has helped to, walk down the path, make our management plans, and also get into more disclosures and assorted certifications. In 10, we got our first chain of custody certification. So all the packaging board that we make, not all, but most of it, we can supply now with chain of custody certification, FSC, chain of custody. FSC, as you know, stands for Forest Stewardship Consortium. And if you follow the principles and directives of FSC, it means that you're running a very sustainable forest management, plantation management, and wood procurement program. We had a big challenge in actually integrating it to farmers because, the FSC forest management certifications were designed for large, big plantations. And what we did was procure wood from a lot of small and medium farmers. Anyway, we got a group certification that happened. Along the way, we also have other certifications like the Book Chain Project and the EPCI, all through the WWF. We are also, along with Gothard, one of the pioneers as far as the CII Green Core ratings are concerned. I see Ramnath here. So the Platinum Plus and Platinum rated units give a more holistic view of the way our factories operate, and that includes sourcing, procurement, the supply chain up to the factory, and also the downstream supply chain. And in 2021, we have worked with CII Green Center in Hyderabad, the Gothard Green Business Center, and evolved a new Green Pro packaging paper standard, which I think companies like P&G, ITC, and the consumer side would all be interested in, because these are all holistic, an attempt to integrate the entire supply chain from the paper supplier up to the brand owner and thereafter the consumer. So for us, what became a matter of sourcing became survival, became sustainable agri-forestry, led to the Forest Stewardship Council chain of custody, went into the FSC forest management, which is about wood itself. We developed the downstream packaging linkages. You will see some of the customers that we have. And we also work through WWF GFTN and other partners in influencing customer perceptions. So this has been the journey for a paper business located in India, which has grown along with the economy. We have grown at 3-4% faster than the economy, you can say, over the last 10-15 years. And we are the principal of the largest paper company today in India as a business division. And this is how our plantations have grown. And all this is within Andhra Pradesh and now Telangana, and within, say, 300 to 500 kilometers from our mill. So overall, I think over 800,000 acres have been greened by us, which otherwise may not have seen enough cultivation. And how we manage to do it is by having short rotation crops like eucalyptus, yubabul, and casuarina, matching it to the soil and the climate, and giving extension services to the farmers, and making it competitive for them. The farmer is the principal supplier here. And if he is not interested as a model, then you won't have sustainability. So we got them interested in this model, made it economic for them, and have now added the sustainability certification too. And today we have over 200,000 tons of a pulp actually coming from the sustainable, the certified wood procurement from the group certifications that we have. So you can see the records. So along with it, climate change has become very important, and rightfully so. every green cover that we add here, helps in sequestration. So in our sustainability claim, which we make every year, which is to the global reporting initiative, the GRI standards, we claim carbon positive, and that entirely comes from the plantation activity that we do. So our aim has been that we grow 2 trees if you have to use 1 tree, and that's been the force that has been guiding us. So you can see the impact of the plantations, and it's broad, it's economic, social, and productivity has grown up by 10 times. We cover close to 9 lakh acres now. Biodiversity, out of the 8 lakh acres which are green, 30,000 acres are biodiversity plots. Although we are not in a hotspot or face anything like that, it's mainly an agricultural kind of area, and a lot of it's slightly arid, if I might say so. We have ensured that local flora and the local agriculture is also preserved through the biodiversity plots. And as I speak, the government of Telangana has actually handed over 600 acres of their forest which they want us to run as a model biodiversity plot next to our factory. So the paper industry in India had to innovate in order to even be in business and grow. So we don't actually use local forest wood material at all. There is a little bit of bamboo, I think, which is used by government paper mills, which make newsprint, and maybe wherever bamboo is available, we don't depend on that. We don't take any wood from the forest. Our entire model is based on agri-farm forestry, and all the wood that increasingly this amount of wood is also getting certified. We can look at what we are procuring in terms of the wood. 2.5 lakh metric tons annually is FM certified wood. 41,000 hectares of our total plantations is FM certified. And you can look at how the certified products have been growing in terms of the overall sale. So we began in 2011, and today we sell 75,000 tons of products which are certified. It is about 15% of our paperboard production. And we are members of GFTN. We have developed the necessary linkages and the certifications. And you can look at the companies that have. So initially, the companies which were interested were all companies which were in the fishing space, and the global MNCs which operate in India. And I must say that Tetra Pak and Unilever have played the lead role here. But increasingly, you can see companies which are Indian also, like Havels, for example, and MTR, which all want to actually buy certified kind of paper. So that's the main motive here. So Jockey also has probably come into this, and we see this movement growing. And the way out for Indian paper industry is only to meet its hardwood pulp requirement entirely from, such agri-plantation sources. And there is no other way to depend on government-owned forests or plantations. So this is an example which I thought I'll end my short presentation. So, consumer pressure can also make large brand owners sometimes shift and lead you into buy. So the question was about how do you make the supply chain more responsive and more sustainable. So McDonald's, for example, had to announce in 2018 about their move to paper straws because of a signature campaign in the UK. So there are these movements, and in India today, you see so much use of social media. Unfortunately, a lot of the debates and the interests on socio-political themes. I wish a lot more of it was a bit environment and ecology oriented and about making brands a bit more responsible and towards sustainability. But I'm sure that will come. After COVID, all of us are a bit humbled. All of us realize the interconnections. We all see the forest fires everywhere beamed on our TV. And I think it's only a question of building on this awareness, which will shortly make sure that the supply chains increasingly become more and more sustainable. Thank you. So this is my introduction for this session.
So much, Mr. Venkataraman, for this very interesting presentation and for sharing the insights on how ITC PSPD has been engaging across the entire value chain with all the stakeholders, including smallholders as well as consumers and suppliers. So I think with this, we'll move forward. We'll move forward to our final speaker for the session, Mr. Ramnath Vaidyanathan, the Head of Environmental Sustainability at Gothard Group, to share learnings from Gothard's journey on implementing deforestation-free supply chains and share some insights for Indian companies starting out on this journey. Over to you, Mr. Vaidyanathan.
Thank you, Karishma. I hope I'm audible. Yeah.
Yep.
Good afternoon to all the panelists and to everybody who's listening in. Thank you for your time. A lot of what thoughts that were going on in my head about this entire subject have been covered by the speakers before. So I'll try to add to it rather than speaking about redundant things. So we at Gothard are a very interesting space when it comes to forests. Because on one hand, we're big consumers of palm oil and paper, as you know. In fact, the previous speaker, Mr. Venkataraman, also mentioned one of the biggest purchasers of paper as well from ITC in terms of our packaging, primary and secondary. But we also have an agro business, one of which the divisions is the production of palm oil. So we're also producers of forest-based commodities as well as a consumer. So we find ourselves in a very, very interesting space when it comes to speaking about sustainability, in this regard. What I would say is that, in terms of commitments, I think both the speakers before mentioned most of the stuff like the RSPO and the other commitments of which we are also a part of. I think where I'll speak more about, what really are the next steps and the challenges that we are facing primarily in this regard. So let me speak from the hat of consumer of, forest commodities to start off with, then I'll speak from the producer side. The last mile traceability continues to be the biggest issue, especially when we're talking about international imports of palm oil. And that's one thing that we are working quite silently towards. One of the things that we undertook, and I think this is something that was a big eye-opener for us, was to do a very detailed risk assessment on the forest commodities itself. Not just as a part of the overall ESG risk assessment that we otherwise undertake, but a very specific one, and put together a sustainable palm oil policy under which this risk assessment is undertaken at a fairly regular interval. Now, the interesting aspect, one of the most interesting aspects that came out of this particular risk exercise, is which took into account everything from climate risks to supply chain disruptions to regulatory risks to all other stakeholders, is that just purely from climate risk itself, the disruptions to the supply chain have already seen price fluctuations of up to 40% in palm oil, which means that we've already seen the times due to severe climate events where we had to pay a 40% premium. Now, the argument against sustainability is always that it's too expensive. But if you just look at the numbers, and if you just see the actual cost of going towards 100% certified palm oil, the cost is only about 15 to 20% at max. So clearly, there's arbitrage available there. The question is, how soon is this risk, or how soon can we expect the risk to manifest itself? I think it's sooner rather than later. We kept thinking it's a while away, but I think it's much sooner than what is originally expected to be. So I think this is one of the reasons why we have also set a target for the chemicals business to be 100% RSPO certified by 2025, and for consumer products to be at least 50% by 2025. That's the target we've taken up. This is from the palm oil perspective only. And one of the areas where we want to work really heavily is work with governments and work with international bodies to really ensure that last mile traceability. What I mean by that is that even today, the disparity between the transparency of information is huge. I am able to get refinery level data for about 100% of all of our suppliers, and up to the mill for about 85%. But when it comes down to the actual plantation, it reduces to around 30 to 35%. So clearly, that's the big gap there. That's where we're really lacking. We're really not able to pinpoint down to the ground, because unless we get to that, there is no way of really knowing if it's transparently 100% certified sustainable. And I say this, I'll come back to it when I'm discussing from the producer perspective, because it is not that producing 100% sustainable palm oil is not possible, because we are doing it over here in India. There are other challenges which represent itself in that space. But like I said, when I speak from the producer point, I'll cover that. From the paper perspective, we are committed to sourcing 100% of all of our paper certified sustainably by 2025. And this is something that we have been working on for a while, because we are a big consumer of primary and secondary packaging paper. Again, here, it's more in terms of, the last mile, creating the dotted line and really firming it up to understand up to the plantation level. Because I don't think it's a question of the data not being available. It's just that the entire ecosystem has to be asking the same questions. And that, I think, is one of the most critical aspects, and which is why a panel like this and more such discussions among industry peers are very important, because this is one space where individual actions or even actions by the three of us, just for example, 3 companies here or 10 companies, is not going to really mean anything unless the entire ecosystem comes along. So I think that's very critical. That's why usually it's often thought of passing the buck on, or passing the hot potato to the government to say regulation should play a part in how we proceed forward. But in this case, it's very much the case that it has to be driven more through, I would say, a carrot approach rather than a stick approach. As with all sustainability, I don't think a stick approach, we are mature enough for that yet. But I think there has to be at least some reward for good behavior, even if there is not punishment for bad behavior, at least to start off with. But that has to apply to the entire ecosystem, because you cannot lose out on a competitive advantage because of sustainability. And that should never be the precedent that's set to any regulatory mechanism. Now, very quickly, since we are short of time, I'll just speak from the agro perspective as well, because as an agro business, we're also a producer of palm oil. So we, just like Mr. Venkatam, we are working with smallholders, suppliers, to grow to actually grow the palm oil. And this is all, naturally cultivated land. There's been no deforestation to cultivate any of this. We work very closely with the suppliers, with the farmers, in actually training them on sustainable practices, both from a climate and a water perspective, as well as a resource efficiency perspective. But we can see the effects of climate change directly on the growth of the industry itself. Severe temperature increases have resulted in much smaller palm fruits, and which is why the productivity has reduced. And when you're trying to grow sustainable palm oil without cultivating further land, any loss in productivity is a big hit to the business, because you're literally trying to make the most out of the available resources that you have. So we have seen firsthand, again, like I said, big impacts, close to about 20 to 30% price impact, just due to the loss of productivity due to climate change itself. So it's no longer something that is, a hypothetical, futuristic thing. It has happened already to us quite a few times. The other paradox here in India, from the palm oil producer perspective, is that the question that I get often from the team that's producing it is, are there customers willing to pay a premium because we are sustainably producing this palm oil? Is there a premium that can be attached to selling this? Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case, because the controls on the prices are so stringent that there really isn't any incentive for us to be sustainable, other than the fact that it ties in with our own targets. So this is where I come back to the point again that we really need some sort of mechanism which incentivizes growers to adopt sustainable practices, either through a price premium or through some other non-financial incentives. But that is the only way you're going to get people to really shift the entire floor up. Otherwise, it'll be the same question as with other aspects of sustainability, where companies which are at the front end will show great results, but overall the needle for the world and for India is not going to move much. So I think that's why it's very important for all of us to get involved and do something together. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Mr. Vedant. I think you made a very important point that in terms of producer as well as consumer perspectives, there are some aspects that still need to be looked at. So looking at that, we'll just move on to some questions. We'll start with some questions with just considering that the companies that we currently have are amongst the leaders in terms of sustainability and in terms of the commitments that we have made towards responsible sourcing. But if we have to implement these commitments in companies, Indian companies that are still starting out on their journey, then I would like to hear from Mr. Girish from P&G. I just want to understand, what are the unique challenges that you've been facing in meeting your global sustainable sourcing commitments in India, and what are the opportunities in India? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Karishma, for that question. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we source primarily from Indonesia and Malaysia. We buy, very little, I would say, materials in India because most of our materials are imported into India from Malaysia, Indonesia, where we have our plants. However, one of the unique challenges, I think, that we as a FMCG company, and I would say one of our roles is to be a role model, right? So we want to role model the behaviors that we want to see from Indian companies. And as a result of that, I think having policies which support certified sustainable materials is clearly important. The other area I think that we help to drive is help to drive solutions and challenge bring down barriers. And I know that one of the previous speakers talked about traceability and how do we get to the plantation. That clearly is the kind of work that P&G is doing with the industry to help drive to get to a industry standard solution. So we're working with the likes of what I would say the other peer group, the growers and traders, through the Palm Oil Coalition Group, for example, and driving solutions to get to I would say, get to a solution which the industry can adopt. And it's not easy, but on the other hand, I think, you know, that we are tackling them head on and giving industry and giving the players who are skeptical some element of, you know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think the other key area that, you know, we have a challenge is consumer awareness. You know, how do we drive consumer awareness to ensure that, you know, they know that when one of the materials has been responsibly sourced and it, you know, it creates a benefit for them and also, you know, for their future. So I think, you know, I would say they're the three key challenges that we have that, you know, that the likes of P&G is working to help drive a solution to. And I would say it's not unique to India, but I think, you know, India is in a unique position because of the fact that it imports a huge amount of oil or palm oil or any other, you know, forest commodity. And unless India transitions, sorry that I think there's a loud noise here, unless India transitions to, you know, sustainable practices and sustainable sourcing, it's very difficult for the world to, you know, they're the tipping point, I would say.
You made a very important point that India is in a very important position given that it's a major importer and major consumer. So it has a very important role to play in driving the change. And there are some challenges that the companies as well have been facing in implementing these and increasing the uptake of sustainably certified products. So in that context, I would like to ask Ms. Wang about the role of financial institutions. So do you think the financial institutions should push the change so that the companies move towards zero net deforestation, or should the change come from the companies?
So I think the investment community has an important role to play here. I think, you know, from Aerosec Partners' perspective, as I mentioned before, we are minority shareholders as we invest in publicly listed companies. So we can't force the change, but we can use engagement with our holdings to influence that, and also provide support in terms of, you know, sharing best practices, in terms of, you know, providing any expertise that we can offer. I think, as you mentioned, Karishma, the companies on our panel today, they're quite advanced. They're very advanced in their sustainability journeys, but we do have investments that are much earlier, in a much earlier stage. And, you know, one of the first things that needs to happen is, and that we prioritize, is actually trying to build understanding within that company of what the business case for thinking about some of these issues is, why they should care, why their stakeholders care. And sometimes that can take a few years, you know, of investing for the company to understand, you know, we're long-term partners, we care about this for mutually beneficial reasons, we're not just trying to tick a box. And so I think patience and persistence as shareholders is key here. And I think in terms of, you know, the what would be helpful, I think, you know, the work, of course, that WWF is doing is extremely helpful, and some of those indices and measurement frameworks mentioned earlier by Vidya will be useful for the financial industry in terms of sending cohesive, consistent messages to companies. I'm sure companies get, you know, IR get a lot of requests for data, requests for policies, etc. And I think it will be helpful if we have, as we have now for climate change, we have more of these standardized frameworks for the investment industry for things like deforestation and for, you know, biodiversity.
Ms. Wang, this is very helpful to know. So now my next question would be for ITC and Gothard, since both of you are like companies that are far ahead of the curve in India in terms of implementing deforestation-free supply chains. So just some perspectives on your guidance for newer companies in India that are just starting, One is that, and also, like both of you mentioned, working effectively with the suppliers. So how can companies in India work effectively with suppliers to achieve the sustainable procurement goals? And what are the key challenges that are encountered in working with suppliers in terms of capacity building or anything else that you are facing? And how you've been navigating those?
Ramnath, you want to go first?
You can go first. No issues, please.
Okay, so our model is very unique, as I said, because I'm representing the perspective of ITC from a pulp and paper business, and we had to do it out of necessity. But yeah, there is a learning. The entire industry now follows our model of those agri plantations. So it's been a very long journey. So I think you need an enlightened management at the top, number one, to start off such journeys, because something which was planted as a seed in 89, 90s has finally come to fruit after 15, 20 years and has become the standard business model in terms of having a sustainable supply chain for wood. So we had to be that long-sighted initially. So a startup or a small company or somebody who always says value for money or affordable may not always see things that way. So partly it helps to belong to a pedigree like ITC or Gothard in order to start such things. But over time, I think what has happened is whatever companies like us thought of, or the management then thought of, has virtually now become a de facto necessity, because our forest today can't supply wood, for example, to the pulp and paper industry. So either you import pulp from Canada or Scandinavia or South America or Indonesia, if it is allowed from Indonesia, or you only do such things which you can do in your country in order to build a sustainable model. So that's what we have done with our farmers. So I think you have to make, given India's challenges, which are not only about sustainability, but also about livelihoods, about, economic welfare and all that, you have to start with the farmer as a unit, and you have to know your area, and you have to build the relationships with him so that he is interested. So I can tell you today that with respect to, half the cash crops that the farmers would grow in districts like Kamam or Krishna or Guntur or closer home at Bhadrachalam, wood is viable for them to grow. The units of cultivation may not be viable to grow, but wood is viable for them to grow. It requires less labor. Initial 1 year, you require some tending. After that, for the next 3 years, you don't. And it provides them that once in a 3.5, 4 year windfall kind of thing, the marriage in the family, blah, 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 and all those things. So they're taken wholesale to wood farming. So we did a lot of things. So we invested heavily in biotechnology and in clonal propagation. So clonal propagation has been a savior and not seed-based propagation. So clonal propagation gets you much higher productive yields. And it's through such increase in yields is how the farmer has been able to actually realize. So you need higher survival, higher yield. You need more optimum usage of resources like water. You need the right inputs. You need biotechnology people and agronomists and farm advisors to go and meet them from time to time. Imagine the scale of dealing with 33,500 farmers. So it's not that wood-based industry in India is unviable, or you have to import wood from Southeast Asian countries or elsewhere. You have to build the necessary backup and framework and be wise enough to start, planting 3-4 years ahead of your industry growth. And along the way, we found that the group certifications, which were in FSC, thanks to our involvement WWF, could be a way out to actually build traceability and also get into the certification and disclosure mode. So that helped us. We have been publishing, ITC as a company have been publishing its sustainability reports in 2003, which is, even across global company and for an Indian company, one of the earliest attempts, 18 years it's been. So our disclosure and record is complete. We have married it to the product certifications. As I told you, initially it was the foreign multinationals operating in India who are interested. But if you ask me, the last 2-3 years, a tremendous interest from our own Indian companies. We also build market linkages through our own business. We have a stationery business, as classmate paper. So that also promotes the plantation grown wood and pulp and paper which they get from us and through that medium. Then companies like Gothard, Tetra Pak, leave us to name some of the initial startups, but today I think there's a whole host of companies which are now interested in it. So in this globalization which is happening now after the supply chains have got broken, cheap free imports are no more the alternative, if I might say so. There's a lot of disruption to supply chains, and people are going to depend more and more on more sustainable, viable local supply chains. And I think that's a good starting point for carrying on the story of sustainability. Whether in FMCG business or in the paper business, it is going to become important because that's the only way to go forward now. There is nobody cheaper from anywhere else who's going to undercut you at least for the next 1 year in a hurry. So if there is global growth, I think sustainability will come back to the front seat and more companies will build more robust chains. So how to take it forward? I think there are many players in this story. Whether you're going to depend on a regulatory framework, whether you're going to build on your relationship with B2B companies and their own statements and declarations of how they want to move forward, or whether you can influence the consumer in some kind of way, to show his approval or disapproval through footfalls of the end product and therefore link to a sustainable company. I think all this will play a part. Yeah, over to you, Ramnath.
Yeah, so I'll answer those questions, both questions in as concise a manner as I can. The
Mr.
first,
Ramnath, sorry to interrupt, but we just have 3-4 minutes remaining, so
no
we
worries.
just have to. Yeah, I just wanted to, in case you just.
No worries. No, just very quickly, I'll sum it up in one phrase. For these people who are just getting into this, so don't let perfect become the enemy of good. That's something I always say. So don't keep waiting around for the perfect situation to occur to start working on this, because you'll be surprised that 80% of the efforts on any sustainability, whether it's water, forests, climate, can be achieved with not much investment and not much of an outlay. So don't worry about the last 20%. Do the first 80%. You think about the 20% later. So that would be just and in terms of what we can do, I think, like I said, have sustainable procurement policies, have strong audits of your suppliers, but not with the view of punishing them or at this stage. To start off with, you have to raise the floor. So really share your best practices with them, help them come up to that level. Once 80% of the industry is at that level, then you can start looking at selective supplier policies and things like that. But I think the onus is on us to really raise the floor.
Very good.
Much for your for this very insightful points and very engaging discussion. I think it was very interesting to hear views from all of the panelists. With that, I would just like to summarize with some final words based on what our speakers have shared. So in terms of what companies can do, can we say that we're saying that the companies can maybe first commit, then act, and then monitor the progress that they're doing. So that is something that the companies are already doing, companies that are far ahead of the curve, companies that we have on the panel, and this can set an example for the Indian companies to start on their sustainability journey. So in that context, I also wanted to mention that WWF has been coming out with a guide for sustainable procurement across the Indian palm oil consumers. And through this, we aim to encourage the businesses to start out on the sustainability journey, giving case studies from industry leaders such as those that we have here right now, and encourage these companies to start out in alignment with the AFI Accountability Framework guidelines. So this will be ready for dissemination soon, and we look forward to having our inputs on it. So that was it. In case there are any final remarks, we can just take that, or else we can just close the session. Just having some.
Okay, so since the CII session, we are all looking for, what is the route, how to make it more sustainable, and I have P&G and Gothard here. So to Girish and to Ramnath, I would say that there's a new Green Pro packaging paper standard, which I just got a couple of months back, and it tries to take a holistic view. Yeah. So it can be done at the level of a converter who's supplying to you, or it can be done even at the level of a package. So it combines sustainability. It has marks for, the raw material sustainable quotient, if I might say so, on wood. Also the type of ink, toxicology, blah, blah, all that they do, including cubic volume and blah, blah of the packaging and what design elements go into it. Yeah. So that is something I think I would urge all the panelists to consider.
I believe we've already had initial discussions on this. We already started discussing. Yeah. So this is well on our way on that. Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. And it's exciting to see that we're on track and we're going forward, and we'll have some challenges, but I think we'll overcome those together. So we look forward to working together for building deforestation-free supply chains in India. Thank you so much. It's been a great discussion.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you all. Bye. Have a good rest of the day.